Welcome to Innovation Brief by IdeaScale, where we turn your work team into innovators.
All right, so as leaders in innovation, you're always looking at new ideas, new strategies. But how do you know? How do you really know if what you're looking at is the real deal? Like, how do you avoid getting caught up in something that just looks shiny and exciting but may not actually deliver? How do you make sure you're basing your decisions on solid ground and not just a gut feeling?
Yeah, that's the question, right? That's what everyone wants to know, and that's what we're going to dig into today. It's all about quantitative research design. And it sounds kind of technical, but really it's about bringing some rigor to the world of innovation.
Yeah, I like that rigor. Because, for anyone out there leading innovation, and I'm talking to the CIOs, the CEOs, directors, tech leaders, this isn't about becoming a statistician or anything. This is about understanding how to really look at the data, how to test your assumptions and make sure you're driving innovation, in a way that actually gets results.
Exactly. And at the heart of it all, quantitative research design is just a structured way of collecting and analyzing data, but it's numerical data. And so you can answer very specific questions, test your hypotheses, using hard numbers, and that gives you a way clearer picture of what's going on.
So I think we need to take a step back for a sec. For people who are maybe not as familiar with this, what is quantitative research design? Just like in plain English.
Sure. So think about it like this. It's a way to look at the world, investigate things, but you're using numbers. You're using things you can measure. It's a method that's used in so many fields, right? Like you can use it to understand consumer behavior. You can see how effective a certain intervention is in psychology. I mean, it's really broad. But the key is you're collecting data that you can count, you can measure, and then you're using statistics to analyze it all.
Okay, so I get that. That's how it works. But why should someone who's head down focusing on innovation, why should they care? What's in it for them?
Well, I think there are a couple of big advantages here. First off, you're going beyond just anecdotes and stories. You can actually look at your findings and apply them on a bigger scale. So, for example, let's say you're trying out a new feature, right, with a small group, and it seems to be working. Quantitative research can tell you, hey, is this actually likely to work for all your users, or is this just a fluke? And then, second, when you analyze the statistics, you can really put your assumptions to the test. Like, are these relationships you think you see, are they actually there? Are they statistically significant? Or is it just random? And maybe the most important thing for innovators, it can help you see patterns and relationships in your data, things you might have missed otherwise. Maybe there's a correlation between how you train your employees and how successful their projects are. You wouldn't know unless you looked at the numbers. And all of this gives you a much stronger foundation for making decisions about where to focus your energy, where to invest in innovation.
Right. So you're not just shooting in the dark. You actually have evidence. That makes sense. But any approach has limitations. What are some things we need to watch out for?
For sure. And one of the big ones is that when you focus only on the numbers, you can sometimes, oversimplify things. Human behavior, the way innovation works, it's complex. It doesn't always fit neatly into boxes and metrics. So you might miss some of the deeper insights you could get if you were looking at the qualitative side of things too. And also, it's really important to remember that your results, they're only as good as your data. Like if you do a survey, but the survey is poorly designed, your results aren't going to be reliable. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
That's a really good point. So let's say we want to do this right. We want to have a solid quantitative research design. What are the essential pieces? What do we absolutely need to have?
Well, it all starts with the research question, right? You have to know what you're trying to figure out, and it has to be something you can measure. So for someone who's, leading innovation, a good research question might be, does giving people dedicated time for experimentation, does that actually lead to more new product ideas? Like, does it actually make a difference? And then once you have your question, you need to think about variables. So in that example, the thing you're changing, that's your independent variable. So that would be the dedicated time for experimentation. And the outcome you're measuring, that's your dependent variable, which in this case is the number of new product ideas. And then you have to make a hypothesis. What do you think is going to happen? Like, okay, if we give teams 20% of their time to experiment, will they come up with, I don't know, 15% more viable new product ideas than teams that don't have that time? And from there, you have to decide who you're going to study. That's your sample. Are you going to look at a few teams? Are you going to look at the whole organization? And then how are you going to collect the data? Are you going to count the ideas? Are you going to do surveys or what. And then, once you have the data, you have to analyze it. What do the numbers actually tell you? And then you have to present your results, your conclusions in a way that people understand, maybe using charts or graphs.
Okay, so that's the foundation. Now let's get into the different ways you can actually do this, the different types of quantitative research design.
Yeah.
Because I think this is where it gets really interesting. This is where you can start to see how you can, adapt this approach to different challenges in innovation.
Yeah, definitely. And the type of design that works best, it really depends on what you're trying to find out and how much control you have over the variables. So let's start with experimental design. This is the gold standard, right? Because you're controlling the variables. So imagine you're trying out 2 different ways to onboard new people to your innovation team, and you want to see which one gets them more engaged, right? You could use an experimental design for that. You're manipulating the onboarding process, you're measuring engagement, and you can see if there's a real cause and effect relationship.
So this is like as close as you can get to, a science experiment in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. And then, sometimes you can't control everything. That's where quasi-experimental design comes in. So let's say you have a new training program for innovation, right? And you roll it out in one department but not another. You can still compare those 2 departments and see if the training had an impact, even though you didn't randomly assign people to groups. It's not as strong as a true experiment, but it still gives you useful information.
Okay, that makes sense. What about if you just want to get a sense of what people think, what their attitudes are? Like if you're trying to gauge how people feel about a new idea.
So for that, you'd use a survey. You ask people questions, you get a bunch of data from a sample of your target audience. You could use this to see how people feel about a new innovation platform or, to understand what customers want to see in a new product. It's a really efficient way to get a lot of data from a lot of people.
Right, so it's good for getting the big picture.
Yeah.
And what if you're trying to see if 2 things are connected? If they're related somehow, but you're not actually trying to change anything.
So then you'd be looking at correlational design. So you measure a couple of variables and you see if they're statistically related. Like maybe you want to see if there's a correlation between how much cross-functional collaboration you have and how quickly you can launch new products. The important thing to remember here is that just because 2 things are correlated, it doesn't mean one causes the other. They might both be influenced by something else entirely, but it can tell you where to look closer. It can point you in the right direction.
That's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Now, what about if you want to see how things change over time? Like if you're tracking the progress of an innovation initiative.
Yeah, for that you'd use longitudinal design. So you collect data from the same people or groups at different points in time. That can be really valuable for seeing the long-term impact of something. Like you could track how engaged employees are with an idea management system over several years. Are they still using it? Are they still coming up with ideas?
And what about if you just want like a snapshot of how things are right now? Like a one-time assessment.
So that would be a cross-sectional design. You're getting data from a whole bunch of different people at a single point in time. Like maybe you want to see how digitally literate your organization is right now. That could help you figure out what kind of technology you can implement.
Makes sense. Okay, last one. What about looking back at past projects, trying to figure out what worked and what didn't?
So that's called ex post facto design. You're basically playing detective. You're looking at what already happened and trying to figure out what caused it. So you could look at data from past innovation projects, see how the teams were structured, what resources they had, what the market was like. And you could try to figure out what the common factors were in the projects that were successful. It's all about learning from experience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the types of designs, but now let's talk about how to actually put this into practice. How do we use these methods to get insights that we can actually use to drive innovation? What are some specific techniques that are really valuable?
Well, one that we've already touched on is surveys. You can use surveys to get a lot of quantitative data about how people feel about things, how they behave. And there are all sorts of ways to structure the questions to get the data you need, multiple choice, rating scales, all that. Another really powerful technique is experimentation. And one of the most common forms of experimentation is A/B testing. So you have 2 versions of something, a web page, a product feature, whatever, and you see which one performs better. And then you have observational studies where you're just watching and recording data about how people behave. Like if you have a new prototype, you could observe how people interact with it and collect data on what they do.
Okay, so those are all like directly focused on testing and improving things. What about other methods? What else should we have in our toolkit?
Well, there's archival research, which is basically looking at data that's already been collected. You could look at your sales figures, you could look at market research reports. That can save you a lot of time and effort because you don't have to collect the data yourself. And then there's content analysis, where you're looking for patterns in qualitative data, like maybe you have a bunch of customer feedback or submissions from an open innovation challenge. You could analyze the language people are using to see what their needs and pain points are. And then there's psychometric testing, which is all about measuring psychological traits. You can use that to see how creative people are or how comfortable they are with taking risks.
All right, so we know what methods we can use, but what about the process? What are the steps involved in actually designing and conducting a quantitative research study? What do innovation leaders need to know to make sure they're doing this right?
Well, the first step is to really understand the problem you're trying to solve. What's the innovation challenge you're facing? And then you need to do your homework. Look at the existing data, the research that's already out there, see what you can learn from that. And then, based on that, you decide which research design is going to be the most effective. And then you define your variables and you formulate your hypotheses. What are you going to measure and what do you think is going to happen? Then you have to figure out who you're going to study and how you're going to collect the data. And then once you have the data, you have to analyze it. And then you interpret the results. What do they mean in the context of your innovation strategy? And finally, you communicate your findings to the people who need to know.
Okay, that makes sense. So to wrap things up, what are some of the most important best practices for making sure we're getting accurate, reliable results? What are the things we absolutely need to keep in mind?
Well, first of all, you need to be really clear about what you're trying to achieve. What are your goals? What are your key performance indicators? And your research objectives need to be aligned with those. And then, like I said, do your research, see what's already out there. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. And when you're measuring things, use validated tools. There are standardized scales for measuring things like customer satisfaction or employee engagement. Don't just make something up if there's already a good tool available. And it's always a good idea to pilot test your data collection methods. Try it out on a small scale before you roll it out to the whole organization. And make sure you have a representative sample. You want to make sure you're getting data from the people who are actually going to be affected by your innovation. And then, of course, be aware of bias, both in the way you collect the data and the way you analyze it. And be meticulous about data quality. Make sure the data is clean and accurate. And use the right statistical techniques. There are a lot of different ways to analyze data, and you need to choose the ones that are appropriate for your research question. And always be mindful of ethical considerations. You're dealing with people's data, so you need to treat it with respect. And finally, document everything. Keep good records of your research process and your findings. That way you can go back and see what you did, and other people can replicate your work if they need to.
This has been really helpful.
Okay.
And it's clear that for anyone who's serious about innovation, who wants to base their decisions on evidence and not just gut feelings, quantitative research it's essential. It's not just a nice to have, it's a must have.
I totally agree. When you embrace a data-driven approach, you can test your assumptions, you can validate your ideas, and you can make better decisions. And that leads to more successful innovation.
Absolutely. So if you're ready to really harness the power of data and take your innovation to the next level, I encourage you to book a demo for a free trial at IdeaScale.com. We can show you how to turn your work team into innovators. And don't forget to join us every Tuesday and Friday for more insights on the deep dive. Subscribe now and let us know what you think in the comments below.